Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to brainstorm a little bit more about show coverage. We've had some time to think about it, and we're just going to think about the kinds of things we want to do at shows and what we want to do. We're thinking a lot harder about it as we go through the summer. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the second hour. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one this morning comes from Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. And Daniel says, I'm looking for suggestions for a turnkey, one-time, actual live, not simulated live, pay-per-view platform, something besides Vimeo.
It's funny because the first impulse for all of us is Vimeo. Vimeo is the one that has really built its business around this. The Cast is the only other one that I've really seen people use in any major way other than building their own. So once you start going past those ones, I don't see a lot of them in the wild. There are other ones out there, but the Cast and Vimeo seem to be the two that have the greatest reach. One thing that I didn't realize is that CacheFly has really gotten into low latency streaming. So I think we're going to try to bring Matt on at some point and have him talk about that because it looks pretty cool. We use CacheFly as a CDN for a lot of the podcasts and everything else. And when they're advertising on Twit and they listed all the stuff that they're doing with live streaming, I'm like, how did I not know that? So we're going to take a look at that as well. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, if it's not a high count, I would look at Zoom. And if you can get the webinar, especially license for 1080, then Zoom has a backend to be able to control registration and PayPal payments. So as long as you're not going over 1,000, it's reasonable. Once you start going over 1,000, it gets pretty expensive.
Yeah. And there is the Zoom webinar and events. I mean, they're kind of built for, I think events is really built for that, right? I mean, to manage charging. Is it just PayPal or does it do other?
I'm not sure. I've only seen PayPal in the back end, but yeah, some people in the group have licenses for Zoom events of 1,000. If you don't want to pay the big bucks, like Greg Gibson, I'm sure would, depending on your content, some of us would allow you to rent our license.
There you go. Very good. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says the techniques photojoseph talks about for post-production are great, and he's got a link there. How could the same open gate approach be used live? Wirecast and or Vmix could with the tight capture equipment, but what hardware switcher could do this? Yeah,
so we've actually done that just with with an ATEM 4K, and so it's what he's talking about is Joseph Lanaschke's doing a open gate, which is a 4x3 using the whole sensor. It's something that the GH6 will do. We do it by doing a higher resolution event. So we basically do a 1080p event and do that in 16:9 and then 9:16. so we do that in the encoder. So we deliver that output to the in our case the elementals. And then in there you can crop the input. So basically you crop the vertically, and then you then you scale it on the way out. So those are the things that that typically is how we've done that in the past, where we have to deliver. The biggest problem is not doing it. It is the biggest problem with this whole process is just getting people to frame it up correctly. It's really hard to frame for both of those at the same time. It can be live, because you really then have to really center frame everything. And so there are some scaling tools. AJA makes one that I have not had the opportunity to use with the Blackmagic cameras. We've used it with other cameras. And basically it takes a 4K and lets you pan and scan inside of it. And then you can actually do some animation inside the frame, animating a vertical frame out of that. But I haven't done it in a long time for that. And we didn't use it for vertical framing. We used it for basically what we've used that for is you have a group of people, let's say 3 people sitting in front of a camera, and they want to be all looking at a virtual event. But there's 3 of them on a couch, and you want to get singles of each one of them, but you want them all looking at the camera through a teleprompter. So then we go at a higher res. And in this case, when we did it, 720 was all we could do. So we had this nice little frame. We could frame each person or go wide. All those things were possible. So it's kind of an interesting way to kind of manage it. But to get back to the question, you would simply do a 4K production and then crop and scale on the way out. Next question.
Our frequent fellow panelist, Tony Mobley, is in from Noonan, Georgia with this question. What's the best suggestions for family members to improve camera? Currently using a Windows laptop, but they might go to a built-in camera, maybe a Brio?
Go ahead, Nigel.
I like the Brio a lot, although on my Mac particularly, they stopped doing the software that allows you to change the angle of the lens. I don't know if there's an alternative from their software from that. But my experience with the people that have the Brio is that when it sits on top of their laptop, unless they position it well, you can't see them well. So maybe put it on a stand and then give it enough light. And if you give it enough light and position it well, it'll look really good. But I am interested to know on the Mac side, if anybody knows the software that will allow you to change the view on the Brio.
Webcam settings will actually do that pretty effectively. You can do the scaling and panning and scanning in there inside of those things on the Mac. Go ahead, Jason.
Allow me to echo that like the easiest possible way to do it is to make the job easier for the camera, and the easiest way to do that is with very good, clean lighting. In the same way that a cheap microphone will sound good if it's under pristine circumstances, a very cheap camera can look good if given enough to work with. So I think that's your step.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, we were testing earlier, and this is a Brio right here. I've received many compliments, and all I did was get a haircut, so it must be the camera. So consequently, the opportunity to manipulate it was given over to Guy Cochran. And so he was actually reframing it. And yes, Nigel, I also do use the webcam settings, but I'm wondering now, originally there were a shortage in the early need for some kind of good camera. So I'm wondering if you could get a used one at a better price, because people are upgrading all the time. So yes, a Brio.
Go ahead, Kenneth.
Yeah, I as well am using a Brio, and while webcam settings does the connections and does give you the zoom abilities and pan and tilt, so does a program from Logic called Logitune, Logitune, and that will enable you to do all that stuff as well. Plus, if you're in a quiet enough area, the little microphone on the Brio camera, while far from professional, does do generally a better job than most laptops I've seen so far.
Yeah, I will say that the latest laptops and computers from Apple the audio has gotten significantly better. Like they definitely turned that up, as well as the webcam quality. I don't know if I can go back to webcams. I think that's the problem for me. But I think that if you're sending one out, I think the Brio is still the best one. I think I bought almost every 4K webcam that is out there, and I think the Brio is still winning. In that area, I still think there's a wide open market. Like if someone all they have to do is change the lens for a lot of these cameras, like literally just change it to a 70 millimeter lens, a 70 degree field of view or 65 degree field of view, and use the same sensor and just blow the market open. Because the work at home, no one wants a wide angle lens. No one wants 90 degrees. So everyone's producing 85 to 100 degree field of view, and there's a huge market, I think, for somewhere between 50 and 70. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, it was said that recording with compression or limiting limits your options. If the instrument is creating the whole track, as in a groovebox or workstation keyboard, what would give the stereo bus the best final polish for a live stream or jam?
Now go ahead, Mitchell.
Yes, to quote that great audio philosopher, Mickey, it depends. It doesn't automatically mean that compression or limiting is going to limit your, no pun intended, I guess, Douglas, your options. If improperly set, it will limit your options. But the idea is that compression or limiting should be used only as a last resort to keep you from overdriving the input on the device that you're working with. So if you can hear it running, then it's probably not a good setting. Your gain structure is probably set right. But if occasionally it pops the limiter or something like that, fine, that's okay. But I always find it a good limiter, a good quality. If you're using a plug-in, a Waves L2 Ultra Maximizer is a nice thing to add a little bit of polish to your mix and also keep it from pushing digital zero.
I go ahead, Bill.
I think what you might be talking about as well is in music recording specifically, it is a traditional old practice to take stems, actually they're channel inserts is what they're called in the music business, before any processing is done to the signal at all. So if you're doing a multi-track recording of a band on stage, for example, you want to take each instrument's channel insert out, record it clean without any processing before somebody adds compression or anything else, because once those things are in the signal, it's impossible to get them out. And there's a lot of techniques or tools for doing that, but I highly recommend that if you want to do band recording, learn this process of getting out of a traditional mixer a channel insert with a completely clean signal of each instrument. You will have so much more flexibility in the back end when you go to master that music for whatever target you're going towards.
Next question.
Next one comes up to us from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. I need a downlight to highlight my Sachtler tripod in the background. What would work best? The Varipole is just above me for mounting.
Go ahead, Guy.
I'm not sure if you pronounce it Datolight or Ditolight, but back in the day, these were really the go-to fixture, and they were, hot lights. But now they're not hot lights, and you can see that they have a focusable beam as he adjusts. Should be coming up here in just a second. There you go. You can see how you can adjust these. So they've got a Fresnel lens on the front to be able to adjust. So that's the recommendation that I would have for something in that realm.
Go ahead, John.
I like Guy's solution way better than mine. I have a DMX light on a light stand back here. See it up there? And then I can control it remotely via DMX.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, I was going to also recommend the Datolight. I actually rented one once to do a tabletop thing for a bottle of wine. They're very controllable. You get barn doors, so you can have that extra control. They're focusable, so you can have a sharp edge if you want. And that was a bigger one that he had in the video, but some of them, they're like the size of your fist. So they're pretty small, but they're very powerful.
Go ahead, Bill.
Those are way too expensive for what I need for here in something like office hours. I love Datolights, and I used to carry 3 of them around with me, and they're fabulous instruments. But for me here in this circumstance, I use a couple that came off the web. Pin spots, these run about $20 or $30 a piece. They're not particularly expensive. I bought a 4-pack of those. They put out a spot beam that is very hard edge. You can put a little bit of diffusion on them. I think I used Roscoe Frost on them. It spreads the light out, gives you a nice soft pattern. You can also put neutral density on them if a little bit too bright or dark, and they run probably under $20 a piece. If you need a little more punch, there's another one that I had specified that has a little more power output. There it is. So that's a single one. I think that runs about $10 a piece. They're not particularly sophisticated lights. They just put out a lot of decent LED normal colored light. And so if you're willing to do your modification via physical means, gels particularly, they work great.
And Mitchell, I would say don't go subtle. Think Airy T24. It's only the biggest problem you'll have with that is that you have to figure out how you're going to supply 20,000 watts to the light itself. But you will see that Sachtler. Like I'm just saying, it'll be there for you. Go ahead, Mitchell.
It'll be a melted pool of metal.
It'll get a little warm in the room, when you turn that baby on.
You can probably find a carbon arc follow spot cheap too.
Exactly.
I thank you all for your suggestions. And Bill, even though that the last light was for a disco ball, thanks a lot.
It works. I'm not particularly, I don't care what they call it. I want to know if I can use it.
All right, next question.
Okay, next one comes up to us from Todd Perry in Prescott, Arizona. Recording using ZoomISO through an ATEM ISO, but would also like to have Zoom save locally with separate audio tracks. Cloud Record does not seem to save separate tracks. Upon ending the call, ZoomISO does not convert the local files.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I think you would need to be in that meeting with a regular Zoom account and then do the recordable tracks as the owner. ZoomISO would have to join, I believe. That ZoomISO would have to join that meeting, but the owner would need to be, or whatever you have it set for cloud, would have to record locally with the vanilla client. I think that's your problem. Yeah, interesting. Next question.
Next one comes to us from our friend Josh. Not Josh. Mitchell Hill. Here we go. Wilmington, Delaware. Jonas demonstrated a clever Earth globe widget that would work great to show question locations around the world. Can we use it?
I thought we already had one. I'm confused. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, the one I've seen two. One is sort of a flattened Earth Google Earth thing. The other one is the globe. The one I'm talking about, it's a globe that turns just in time to get right to the location where the question's coming from, and then this. Well,
I'm happy for the team to play with those. Yeah. So whether it's Jonas's or whether it's the one that has been used in the past, I think it's a great idea. I think we should use those globes more often. So I think that whichever one we use, I think that we should use it more to do that. I think it's just a matter of figuring it out. So yeah. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, our friend from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, says, I'm looking for a Bluetooth transceiver to connect directly to a Behringer Flow 8 versus direct to a PC. The device needs to interface with a headset profile for mic and headphones. A home theater bypass unit exists, but must choose between TX transmit and RX receive modes. No headset.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, this is a really tricky one, and I'm going to start by saying I don't know exactly if this thing exists, but I'm going to give you a little bit of context that may help you narrow them down. aptX is the Bluetooth profile that ends up with a whole bunch of different subcategories: SBC, HD, AAC, LDAC. And none of these do that simultaneous, high-quality, low-latency transfer. Apple has toyed with this. They have, I believe, their own clever way of doing this with like the high-end headphones. But I'm unaware of a kind of brand-independent way that you can get the simultaneous send and receive, with the exception of two separate Bluetooth, a sender and a transceiver, both kind of locked off and their own device.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
There's a device made by Angry Audio, and I think they cleverly call it the Bluetooth device that'll allow you to get audio in and out, and it's got XLRs. The question is whether it's too purpose-built for radio, in that it's a good way to get Bluetooth into the console, but I can't speak to the headset.
Yeah, and Angry Audio, JK Audio, those both kind of build a lot of these kind of glue that you can kind of tie into those things. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. I read an article, he says, and he's got the link there, that mentions that in-office workers can build greater trust and connection, considering what we have accomplished as a geographically distributed community. Do you think that's outmoded thinking?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I think you've got to put yourself in the position that this is somebody who doesn't necessarily do what we do, but is working in an office. And you've got to ask yourself, are you nearer the beginning of your career or nearer the end? If you are nearer the end, where you have a set of skills that are really identifiable, really clear, and to some extent the company needs you more than you need them, then you have all the flexibility to try and put the conditions on that you want to be effective. If you are closer to the beginning of your career, you are still acquiring mentors, you are still acquiring both content, approach, and network, then you'll find not being in the office will be a career-limiting thing. And I would really encourage you to read the bottom half of the article, which gives you all the downsides of not being in the office. Now, those downsides may not be important to you. You may have a specialist set of skills. You may feel that you're good enough without them and you can do without them. But I would really encourage people to read that set, because if you are in the early days of your career, this will damage your career.
I go with Sky.
My father grew up on the farm in Kansas, and as a professional in his industry, he taught me the one thing was know who your boss is and what they expect of you. And so how do you do that in person or online? Both of those are challenging, because maybe you're not an extrovert. Maybe you don't like to hang out at the water cooler, or whatever the current water cooler is. Maybe you accidentally take something from the fridge or leave something in there. So these social constructs that happen inside an office, maybe you overspeak. These are challenges that you do now in Zoom meetings. So I think there is no perfect answer, but I think staying in connected with community. But I'll go back to my dad's response. Know who your boss is and what they expect of you, and go, Alex.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's a very wise answer. In fact, both gentlemen before me said some great stuff. What about people you don't know you're going to be doing business with? I mean, it could be business related, but you might meet them on social media or on Zoom and then form a business relationship. So it's a matter of timing, too, to keep that in consideration. I never would have thought that I might do business with Mickey, but when you check in on after hours around 11 o'clock Eastern, when it's the Mickey and Mitch comedy hour, you might find there's a lot of bonding going on that, no? Okay, no bonding.
Go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, I've often been a proponent of the meeting after the meeting, which means although there are times when there's nobody standing around the water cooler, it's still there. And the personal relationships get built when the business problem of the moment has been solved, and then you get a chance to chat. We do that here. We have this meeting, and then we have after hours. And after hours is the social part of this, what can be a very involved and highly technical meeting right now. So there's room for both of that, and I think we solve it quite adequately.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Friendship will always be a function of proximity, whether that proximity is created at great expense and complexity over Zoom or in person. Ask me which one's easier.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we bring a lot of scale to it, and I do agree that after hours has been a key piece of us, building that kind of online community where you can kind of have something that's more informal and bouncing things around and doing things together in a lot of ways. And again, I think you do give up some things when you're not in person with folks. I mean, I definitely, when I'm working with clients, when I'm there, there's definitely a lot of movement there. But I think that I'm not clear that it makes up for the fact that I'm now stuck in an office, and so I find that to be very confining, and mostly because I have to admit that I think a lot of us, especially in the kind of the open office environment, a lot of folks are you're not as permanent where you are anymore. So like I have way more tools at my house than I have at the office, and so as a result, I tend to resist wanting to go to the office because I'm now kind of hamstrung from what I can actually do. So I think that's one of the challenges, is that some folks after the work from home have gotten much better. Some people have, and a lot of people did not. So going back to the office was great because they weren't as well stocked there. And for our producers, we'll start the second hour pretty early if you don't ask more questions, because we're cutting through these ones pretty quickly. All right, next question.
Next one comes from Dave Troutman of Edmonton, California. And Dave says, does anyone know of a simple formula for calculating a normal mode in a room to find standing waves for determining the best speaker location?
Go ahead, Bill.
I've never heard of anybody using a formula. This is something where you really have to ring out a room kind of in real time. And the old process is typically like this. Each room is going to have its own dimensions, its own amount of absorption and things like that. So you would set up your system and determine where you're going to be most listening to it. And then you'd ring out the room for that listening position. Or if you're using microphones and you're recording live in this, set up the microphone wherever you're going to do. And then you'd inject a signal, usually pink noise or something like that, into the room at a specific level. And then the important thing is take your measurement mic, and we used to use Earthworks mics for this or something, move it around through the space and watch that spectrum analyzer and watch where room modes like low frequency energy suddenly spikes up. And that is something where standing waves are converging and amplifying the signal. And you can do that with the generator across a frequency sweep, so you can see where high frequencies are also might be converging. And that's where you're going to move your microphone around, representing your ears if you're trying to figure out the best listening position, or representing where you want to put your mic for actual recordings. And it's great to be able to watch whether those various frequencies spike up or get reduced based on the room's reflectance profile. It doesn't take very long to do, but once you do it once, you get an idea of how the reflections are adding together. Low frequencies tend to get boomy really fast when they're additive. High frequencies, less so much, but you can get circumstances where you do have sharp peaks and you're not going to be hearing what you think you are.
Yeah, and there are... There are a variety of, you can probably find a couple simulators that you can put stuff into. So you can add, you can say, I have a room like this. This is what the surfaces are, so on, coefficients, and it will do that calculation, but nothing will be better than testing it. So you'll need to, definitely they use a lot of these simulators especially when they're building a large theater or something. They're not going to build a theater and then measure it. so these simulators are, and we should probably bring somebody in to talk about one of those, but they're pretty interesting puzzles, but you really have to know what your surface coefficients are to know what's actually going to happen there. But that geometry can be simulated and can be calculated fairly effectively. But for smaller rooms, there's not a simple formula for it. It's a pretty complex interaction between surfaces and geometry. But I think that testing is going to be the thing if you're going to add something to a room that already exists. If you're going to build a room, especially if you're going to spend a lot of money on it, the simulators are useful at least at the beginning to kind of get into the ballpark. Next question.
Our next one comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. He says, are there any above 4K capture cards for less than an Alex?
Go ahead, Jason.
No.
No, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there is. There's a Blackmagic Decklink 8K at 645, so if an Alex is $700, then that comes in just under. Now, the question is really like, what are you trying to capture? Because it is an SDI-based version, and so a while back I experimented with this model, which is the 8K. The thing I didn't have was an 8K camera to push in via HDMI. So the $645 version will do SDI for sure, but this is the model to also look at. It is a lot more Alex's. It's more like over a Mickey or what was the other one?
Charles.
Charles.
Yeah. So I did a video on this, and one of the cool things about it is that you can hook up an external disk. So you can hook up, in this example, I hooked up a USB disk. And so if you're needing to store those files, because they're going to be massive, you're going to be concerned with how do you bring it in and how do you store it. So this thing actually acts as a file server as well. So actually, once you hook it up, what I did was I put in the 1 terabyte NVMe drive to cache it, and then you could turn it into a server. It'll have its own IP address, and then you could pick up those files over a 10G network. So think about the whole end-to-end workflow, and I'll put a link to this video in the chat. You guys can watch it, but that's an 8K hyperdeck and $4,995.
Nice. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. At around 1 o'clock in this highlight clip from Office Hours Space, and he has the link there, the logo on Chris Fenwick's shirt is obscured. Could that be because of the product placement logo rights issues?
I think it was a secret message. Go ahead, John.
It wasn't that. Jeffrey did it. Maybe Sky has some more color to add to the situation.
Yes, and yes. Yeah. Jeffrey Powers, part of the team that was doing the delivery of the different pieces of content, we were all running very quickly, and Jeffrey didn't want that particular logo to impede the YouTube. You'll notice on the rest of the video, there's lots of logos and license plates and things, but that he was able to do that, I think, in YouTube as well. So that was a feature I was not aware of. So yeah, that was a specific and strategic instance that Jeffrey Powers chose to blur that piece of product.
All right, go ahead, Mitchell.
Is it possible that Chris was showing some bad taste with his T-shirt selection?
No. Chris is a man of wonderful taste, and it was a deeper conversation than we need to have. It was a stylistic choice, a creative choice, and now we move on.
My only comment is that it should be tracked better. It just needed to be tracked better. Well,
again, it wasn't specifically in a tracking, but maybe that's the next level. A little bit better than next level.
Mocha.
Mocha.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Olivier Richard, Saigon, Vietnam, up next. I have started using my Rode Wireless Go 2, not as a microphone, but as a wireless sound transmitter between my computer and my wired earbuds. Does anyone have any other smart use from the Wireless Go?
That is actually, that's actually how a lot of us are using it. Go ahead, Jason.
No, that is an excellent use. Like the greatest hack ever is, kind of along the same lines as, the minute you realize that a headphone, if you scream loud enough and put it in a mic jack, and it's actually the same thing as, a microphone, so too are the wireless audio transceivers that can also be used backwards as headphone things. So no, I think you got the best hack you could.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. Alex, any update on your telestrator project?
Well, this one works great. As far as getting it further out, there's just a couple little glitches that we're trying to sort out. So hopefully we'll be able to get those out relatively soon. It's very close. The new version is actually better than the version I'm using right now. It's just got to add a couple little things to it. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama says, has anyone been hurt by streaming to Instagram Live, not using a smartphone? Or any suggestions?
I think that, there's been some car accidents people have had trying to use Instagram on their phone. So what I assume that what you're talking about is trying to RTMP to Instagram Live. It can be done. Yellow Duck can get your RTMP feed. There's, I think, a couple other services that do it. I have not heard anyone get nailed for breaking terms of service in the last probably 4 years. There was some point where it seemed like Instagram kind of understood that the policy was dumb and that there were so many people going around it, and more importantly, so many celebrities going around it, around what they were trying to do, that, and for some reason they haven't taken it out of the terms of service, but I don't think they're enforcing it. I can't say that for sure. There's always a chance that someone could turn off your stream, but I haven't heard of anyone having their stream turned off for a long time. But I think that, there was a point where I think Instagram realized that it was stupid, but I think this is just a matter of not changing the actual words in the contract take a lot longer than just ignoring it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. He says, many people on the autism spectrum are better in the mediated social environments with clear rules that are often created online. Do you think that organizations that are emphasizing diversity, equity, and inclusion will take that into account in the workplace of the future?
Go ahead, Jason.
The ones who want to take advantage of the incredible talents of those who work best in constrained spaces would be stupid not to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main challenge is you just have to get something. You have to be really good at what you're doing, and then you can make all kinds of requests about what you want it to look like. So if you want a work environment that is specific to what you're doing, you just have to get up that food chain to a point where you can demand those things. The folks that are saying we're not coming back to work are not food servers at McDonald's. They're programmers that are almost impossible to replace. And they're saying, oh, we don't want to come back, and there's no one else to put in that place. So I think that the key is figuring out how you get up that food chain. Then you can design your environment around you. Go ahead, Peter.
I think the other part of it, I certainly worked in an environment for many years that we had lots of engineers that were on the spectrum. And as part of the management team, we had to be trained to deal with it. I often use the phrase, people are miscast if you try and take them outside of their defined box.
Right.
And we had a few engineers who we would never put in front of a client because they didn't do well. They would actually withdraw upon themselves. But it takes some training on the management team's part to understand that.
And I've definitely learned over time to not. It doesn't matter whether they're on the spectrum or something else. Is finding the box that people fit into well is the key. Not forcing them into a box that they don't fit into well. You want to try to find the thing that they thrive in, and so that can be a very wide range of options. Nigel.
DEI is becoming a bit of a landmine for some companies. So I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to work through some of the issues, which I don't think we should go into here. But I would warn you that's become a bit of a double-edged sword for people. Yeah. And I think the right way is to find others who work at the company to understand from them what the culture is really like, and not what the company says it's like, because that will really tell you. And I appreciate that if you're someone who has struggles reaching out, that's a double complexity for you. But the truth is, you won't really know what it's like to live in that company unless you try it or meet someone else who has some sympathy for the world that you live in, who can explain it to you.
Next question.
Chad Lafarge in Columbia, Missouri is up next. He says, I'm considering revising the Tláloc Traversal to use a 3D model instead of Google Earth. Where would you go for a high-quality, high-res globe model?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
NASA. They have excellent resources for globes, flat Earth. I do a lot of motion graphic design, and I can't tell you how many times I've had to build a model of the Earth, rotating in the correct direction, by the way. And NASA is a good resource because you can get these really, really detailed maps, 4K. I think they even have 8K ones up there now that would allow you to zoom in and zoom out and still get quite a bit of detail when you're zoomed all the way in. The real trick to doing this traversal is that you don't want to be in too tight because then it's just a blur of landscapes flying by and you don't have landmarks to. You need to have enough resolution that you can zoom in enough to see the city or the area where you're going to, and then pull out to show the globe or the curvature at least so you can know where you are.
Go ahead, Sky.
The weather maps that you see in your local local television stations. I was looking for the source of that, but once 10 years ago, before Google Earth, I had a friend at a TV station that was able to get me a map for Haiti, and that was amazing detail, and he could manipulate it and do the zooming. So I'll keep looking for you.
And go, Jason.
Guru Maps Pro on iOS. It can be run on a Mac and will allow you to download not only completely offline, but also navigation level listings. The whole download's about 11 gigabytes for the lower 48 US. And wow, is it good.
Yeah, I think that the hard part you'll have is that it's holding the texture map. So most of the texture maps for the Earth, for instance, are really not designed for you to zoom in on. So they're going to be 8K, but 8K across an entire continent, or 8K across an entire planet is not very much. It'll get soft pretty quickly. So I think you need something that's going to be able to dynamically generate what's happening underneath it, which is what Google Earth does. There is, yeah. I don't know if you'd find something better, to be honest. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Up next, he says, what's the ideal usage and application of a ProMist type filter for a camera? What are the challenges to be aware of when using these types of filters? When might post-production be preferred?
Go ahead, Sky.
Again, you're trying to eliminate the wrinkles, or the character lines on people's faces using a ProMist, and sometimes it's overdone, and you just get this mass of a single color using a ProMist. But we often noticed it on the Oprah channel, and you noticed her camera always had a ProMist. She always looked very smooth and soft. Then they would reverse it, and they didn't have the ProMist when it was too expensive, and the talent was a little craggy.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Sky nailed it there. I mean, I have a ProMist on my camera right now to make me try to look a little bit better. But to be honest with you, I probably don't need it because I'm so handsome at my accelerated age of 67. But I am using the S-Cinetone from Sony, which probably does almost the same thing, but just a lot more dynamically.
Yeah, most effects companies would prefer you not to do that, not to add it. It really makes compositing a lot more difficult to have a ProMist filter added to the entire frame. And so, for post-production, we have filters that will do exactly the same thing as ProMist, and we'd prefer to add those later if required. We do have some talent that requires ProMist on the camera during capture, and so then you have to kind of work around that. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Gregory Wheeler, and he says, can you recommend a reasonably priced encoder to stop or minimize packet loss when streaming to YouTube or Facebook?
Good guy.
Yeah, I would really check the network first to make sure your hops aren't getting interfered with in some kind of additional switch or double NAT or something like that, because it could simply be some kind of network misconfiguration that's causing the packet loss. Next, without spending money, because I have a store where I could sell you, one of the best encoders, and I have elementals and stuff right behind me. But the thing is, look at Resi. So I'll put a link in the chat. They do something where they buffer a ton. So if you don't need the interaction in real time with people, go look at Resi and see how they buffer. You could be out camping in the wilderness, and this thing will buffer like a minute. So look up how they use forward error correction to be able to hold the signal and not just drop it and not give you all the the flaky or pixelated images just because it's not receiving those packets. But yeah, next in line would be H.265 with a service on the other end, like in the cloud, either Teradx Core or who else will do it? There's you can look them up. DACast. There's a couple that'll take SRT or a variant of H.265, transcode it to H.264. Then you can push it to YouTube because YouTube will not take H.265 natively. But a lot of us are using these Epiphan Pearls, and they're not cheap. They're $1,495, and if you want 4K, they're $1,995. So they get expensive, but those are my recommendations.
Go, Jason.
Greg, I'm sorry to have missed you last weekend in Baltimore. Next time. I would say that the Web Presenter is kind of my go-to for this, aside from the ATEM Mini that you're already aware of. They are so good for what they cost. It is kind of spectacular.
Yeah, and this show is streamed to you by the Elemental link. It's about $1,000. Now, you do have a cost per show, so it depends on what you want to do there. I think Guy has one of those little guys there. So that's HDMI or SDI, 1080p. It's using Zixi, so that is going to be, in my opinion, the most stable way to get to the internet. There's Zixi and a little bit of AWS magic, some secret sauce in there to make it even a little bit more stable. So pretty great little box, and we use it every day. Next question.
Next question comes from Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. Daniel says, what travel cases do people use for their 16-inch 2021 MacBook Pros? Anything less expensive than a Pelican?
Go, Jason.
Less expensive. We're not the right group. I have so many of these, and I feel like I have bought every possible laptop sleeve because I think they are cool, and I like my computers to not get dinged up. I have come back again and again to a backpack. Also, SKG makes a decent briefcase that isn't extremely heavy. Other than that, good luck.
John?
Traveling around the world multiple times, I have a Toomey briefcase that's on wheels with the handle. It's the best solution I've ever used.
Next question.
Next question comes from Dennis Wojtek and doesn't say where. Best practices for the Stream Deck in Zoom use and practical use. Mine arrives later today.
Go ahead, Nigel.
I think you have to ask a question, do you want to use the basic Stream Deck software, or are you going to go companion? Because if you're going to go companion, you've got a whole different set of things to do. But you might start with the basic Stream Deck software. It's very easy to use and to configure. Actually, I have two machines, one for each machine. The machine by my right hand actually uses the basic Stream Deck software, and I have 4 things set up all the time. I have, for Zoom particularly, I have mute, I have video on off, I have leave, and I have swap. And those are the things I use most. I would tell you that the buttons are not always perfect. So while I have the mute there, I actually use the keyboard on my Mac because it's much more accurate. But start with the Zoom software, the Stream Deck software, but at some point you'll head to Companion, you'll start again.
Go ahead, John.
Whatever you do, don't let Chris Fenwick program your Stream Deck. I pushed some buttons on my Stream Deck the other day. You don't want to know what happened.
Go ahead, Jason.
What I would add to that is that I have found if you have more than one computer, get Companion off of the computer in front of you, because that's going to be your inclination. Put it right in front of you, and then the minute you realize that the best part about it is if you take it off and put it on a Raspberry Pi, you can do so much more with it because it is its own entity with its own addressable IP, and you can lock that off and do lots of great stuff. So that is the next evolution.
And next question.
Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. comes up next for us this morning. He says, what do you say to someone who wants an in-person event rather than a digital first because they need the spontaneous types of interactions from attendees meeting in hallways, sitting next to each other, and so forth?
I think that what we keep on bringing up to clients that we're talking to, or I bring up to clients as we're talking to them about this, is that, again, it just keeps on coming back to 99.99999% of your audience is not able to come to your event. And so the question is are you going to keep on ignoring them or not? or you're going to start getting good at it? I think that the big thing about digital first over hybrid is that you can have the physical event. What you're trying to do is figure out how do you build that digital experience. So you can have a physical event where people are coming. The digital first part just means you're putting them on an LED wall instead of having them stand on a stage. The people that are watching will actually see them more clearly, hear them more clearly. The graphics will be better integrated. It's actually a better, experience for a lot of folks. It's a better experience for them, but it also means that you can copy that experience. So it means that if you want to put them in an overflow room in another city, that experience can be exactly the same. So no longer, the problem really with overflows in satellite cities is you always know that you're a satellite city. You're always on the outside. You're in the cameras coming in from the back of the room. You see the folks that are in the other physical location. In this case, you're building, if you want something in DC and New York and London, they're all getting the same experience. And with a return camera, you can absolutely talk to them, in the room. You can be answering questions. They can stand up. They can walk up to a mic. I wouldn't recommend it, but people do it. And so now you have your physical event, but you also, if someone's watching on their iPhone or at their home or in a watch party or all those other things, they're getting a great experience, great audio, great video, great, and it allows you to scale that show, over and over and over again. It's not really thinking about what the next show is going to look at. It's looking at the next 10 years. In 10 years, the big shows are all going to be digital. And the question is are you going to start now, training your audience, building your pipelines, getting ready for that, or are you going to get left behind? Because essentially companies that hang on to physical only, they're hanging, this is exactly what happened to the magazines. In the 20 years ago, there's a bunch of us that were telling magazines, you need to convert to a digital audience. You need to start working with them when you can, and they didn't, and most of them are gone. And so no one, I don't know, not many people that I know read magazines much anymore, but they could have, and the ones that converted early, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, others have done really well. In building that audience, but they started early and they started building up that process. And that's what people who are doing events right now have to choose about whether they're going to be, in the bus or under it. But there's not really going to be a lot of choices here over time. Go ahead, Nigel.
I think some of this depends on who you are and who they are to you and how much ability you have to influence them. And if you have the ability to influence them, then I think the conversation Alex articulated better than I could. I think if not, I think you have two options. Find the person who does have the ability to articulate, be that the head of marketing or the head of communications or someone, and try and get them to understand so they can find a way of communicating it through to your client. Because I think it may just be they don't want to hear it from you, but there may be someone they would hear it from. The other thing that Alex has talked about before, which I thought was very clever, was, it may take a lot of smaller bites to get the big bite. So it may be worth saying to them, okay, do this event physical, but could we also do a small virtual one? Could we do a compare and contrast? Try and get them in. Remember, if that executive is used to being on when they have physical feedback, that's the way they've learned to be successful. That's what they've done to be successful for their whole career. Taking that away from them will feel very uncomfortable to them. So drip feed them into that process.
Yeah, and I have a lot of clients that went back to physical events that want to do a lot of different things. And it's not that I try not to be annoying about it. Like, sure, you want to do that? Well, sure, nickel. but I also, show them things over time of, hey, look at what this company's doing, or hey, look at this, or look at what we just did here. And, those are kinds of things. And sometimes it's a drop that, for just to get one company that we worked with, this is 15 years ago, to go to live streaming, I talked about it for 2 years. So it's not like how, it's how do you get them to do the next show? I was looking years out and slowly, talking about it and showing things that are happening. So it's a long campaign, not and a subtle one. If you do it well, it's not something that people notice, like, oh, he's going to talk about the live streaming thing again. It's more of a just, trying to kind of guide them towards that over a long period of time. Go ahead, Bill.
In supporting what Alex is contending here, when I worked mostly with corporate presidents, not as much with CEOs, but sometimes with CEOs, the single most concern on the top of their head with any suggestion that came across the transom was, can it scale? Over and over again, I heard that as their main concern. Whatever the initiative was that was being brought to their desk, if it couldn't scale up particularly, they didn't want to hear about it because that was their point, growing the company and continuing to expand. And so the digital first event is the ultimate solution for can it scale.
Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia. Up next, any suggestions for a similar camera like the Blackmagic Micro Cinema Camera? Blackmagic Design no longer lists this on its website.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it really depends on what you want to do. You could pick up those ones used for pretty good value. We used one, Alex sent one up on Mad in the Kitchen, and it's a good camera, but nowadays I'd probably recommend the BGH one. And just to kind of put it in perspective, this has no monitor. You know, its controls are all HDMI or SDI out. So that's one of the cool things is this has HDMI, SDI, as well as Ethernet. So you can PoE, you can power over Ethernet this thing, and you have all the controls via IP. So you can control every aspect of this menu. And to put it in perspective versus a 6K, like look at how monstrous 6K is. This is the regular 6K. I have the G2 behind me, but I haven't opened it up yet. But I'd probably be looking at the G2 as well because it's got the articulating screen. I think not having that articulating screen on the first version of the 6K is a real downer once you get used to the 6K Pro and seeing how you could swing that around. Because if you do mount a camera up, it's nice to be able to articulate that display and see what you're doing. But yeah, I would look at this, or the Z-Cam is another box camera that has a large sensor. So, and this one's a micro four thirds sensor. There's another bigger, slightly bigger sensor. It's a S35, so that's the BS1. So I'd take a look at that one as well if you want the larger sensor for Super 35.
Yeah, but I think the big problem with Z-Cam is it doesn't have any SDI out, right? It's Ethernet. It drives me crazy.
It's HDMI. I'm not sure why they did it, but it's 4K. You could get RAW out, so I think that's why a lot of these manufacturers have done HDMI, because you can do 4K RAW to like a Ninja 5, and so I think that's why they stuck that on there, because you can't do it with SDI. So,
next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next, and he says, one of the opportunities mentioned in the article that in-office workers more frequently get is the ability to shadow more experienced workers. Why don't we open up the comms behind-the-scenes stuff for this show and others in a breakout room so that we can all do that?
I know you can jump on the team that does this and you can listen to it in the back end. Yeah, there's no, so I don't know who to contact about that, but that's available right now. You can absolutely listen to, it's not available right now. Guy corrected me. How do we have, I thought people could watch that.
Yeah, I've been asking to be a proponent for this for a while. I mean, to me, we would have just a lot more team back there if people could watch and see what's going on, because it's fascinating. You get back there and it's like, wow, this is really cool. But you got to go into the Discord, you got to ask for permission, and only on the weekends. I don't know. I don't think it's right. I think we should have everybody be able to listen to comms and see the multi-view behind the scenes.
I agree. So I will figure out. I have to admit that I see this as a success in the delegation that I don't really know how that works. So in the fact that it's been running on its own, but I actually thought that we were making that available. So I think that we should make that more available to folks. So we'll have more discussions about that, but we'll make it we'll get it out there. Go ahead, Peter.
I was about to say, please make it available. I mean, as you know, this last Saturday, I went through hoops and did everything out of order and got things mailed to the wrong places because I said, I'll raise my hand because I want to watch. All I wanted to do was see how is it done. And then slowly work my way into how do I participate? Exactly the model that Guy was talking about. Otherwise, you have to leap in with both feet. And if you decide quickly to do it, you might land in the shallow end before you land in, as opposed to the deep.
Yeah, I'll find out what's missing and we'll figure out how to put it back in. I think that there's some questions about manpower and infrastructure, but we'll figure out what is what's slowing us down there. But I think that we'll figure that out because I think that my goal in how we train almost everything here as we keep on growing is really to build a system in which you watch the end product. Then you have the opportunity to watch the end product get made. Then you have the opportunity to work on the end product.
Exactly.
And in between all those steps, you're asking questions. So the idea is that we have to have a queue and, places where you're not doing it during the show. Well, you can just watch, but we should have, we should have a place that, maybe once a week we talk about how it's getting made. And once a month, we should be having second hours on this. So we'll do that relatively soon of just what's going on with production, but being able to answer questions and how that works. Cause that would make it a lot easier. I mean, being able to watch it, to Douglas's point, is a big deal. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Tim O'Brien in Chicago says, just getting into higher production Zoom calls, what are some general tips for holding a guest remote speaker to be brought into a call, like Office Hours does with many hosts? Running OBS, he's running OBS in a single camera on-prem. One host, many guests, can run multiple PCs.
Holding a guest remote speaker to be brought into the call. So the way we do that is breakout rooms of some kind of breakout room. And that is using multiple PCs or multiple people. So the breakout room is a big piece of that puzzle. That's how we do it with all of our guests. So you basically have, typically we almost ignore the main room, or that's where people greet people, is in that main room. Then they go out to another, they're going out to a, oftentimes some kind of like holding room. And then we can, depending on how big the event is, this event, we only just go into another room. But in larger events, this might be holding, this might be hair and makeup, HMU. This might be a green room. So basically what happens is people come in here, we welcome them, we push them into one room where they're all kind of hanging out together. This is a safety room. The reason we do this is so someone else that doesn't belong there gets in there. They're not really interacting with the talent. The talent's already been moved somewhere else and they can't get there. So we move people that belong where they need to belong here. We then send them through what we call, hair and makeup, which is mostly checking their audio, their video, so on and so forth. And then we push them into a green room where they're all hanging out again together, but now they're ready for the show. And then from there, we can push them into either a main show, or we can push them into, a breakout room, depending on what kind of system we're using for that. But that's the kind of thing you want to think about. Gives you so much more control. And I don't even know how to run a lot of shows that we do without that. Next question.
Next question comes from Craig McFarland in Boston, Massachusetts. And Craig says, aside from the strategy, what dimensions would a QR code need to be to work on a typical YouTube 720 or 1080?
Go ahead, John.
Not sure the answers, but let me tell you two things. I watched the Super Bowl ad and scanned that on my phone about 30 feet away from the TV, which was a 42-inch TV. And then for the rocket, where the rocket hangs in my local pub down the street, I printed out a QR code. It's about 6 inches tall. And from 30 feet away, you can scan that thing. It's amazing.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'll be mindful of the time here. QR or quick response codes get bigger and more complex as the result of the length of the URL. So there is not a specific answer here. Also, a QR code has 4x overcorrection. So if you notice, there are 4 little kind of wayfinding squares in a QR code that are designed for error correction, which is how you get a logo in the middle of it. Long story short, the encoding can mess with it if you make it too small, and if you make the URL too long, no number of dots is going to help you. So this really is not a specific answer.
Yeah. And what I would recommend is if you're going to use a QR code for a URL, is to always use some version of a tiny URL. So that's a bit.ly, a tiny URL. You want to minimize to what Jason's talking about. Minimize literally how long that string is. We build URLs for this, so we literally have the URL is built, and we build it as short as we possibly can. I like to have a direct link. I like to have it a link to something that we can redirect or whatever we want to do there. But the point is that I will go up to hover, find one that makes sense, and do something .live, .questions, whatever that is, and have that URL bounce to wherever we need it to go for that client. And so typically ours are about in a 1080 frame. ours are about 100 by 100 pixel because I keep them, but specifically because I've kept that that string really small. And so I think that's been 100 to 100 or 150 pixels by 150 pixels. So about 1/10 the height can do that. Some of them, just to be safe, I've done it 250 by 250 because I just want to make sure absolutely sure that you can do it. But the 100 to 150 per, depending on the size of the screen, will work. But I would recommend, I usually go a little bit larger than that because I am paranoid. And so I'd rather make sure that you can do it. We've done it on big screens, and so it's pretty easy. Now, next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama comes back with this one. Anyone use YOLO Box? And so what do you advise, if so? YOLO Box or YOLO Box Pro?
Go ahead, John.
We have a friend. Well, he's been on Office Hours panel a couple of times back in the old days. His name's Carlos Phoenix. He was in the booth at YOLO for NAB, and I would find him on Facebook. Carlos Phoenix. He's the dealer out of New York for that product.
Yep. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, our church bought one during the beginning of the pandemic. An installer installed it, and it worked flawlessly for over 50 weekends that we used it. The thing that I did notice in the forums is that you don't want to push those things. There's lots of people who have been bit by that thing, so read the forums. There's a Facebook group that's very active. I would go jump in there and take a look, but it's on my do not recommend list for the Pro, so I would not get the Pro.
Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada is up next. He says, Carl mentioned using a moving background in Keynote to maintain frame rate in Zoom when sharing screens. Would adding a moving element off screen or under an opaque item have the same effect? Essentially, does Zoom look for pixels changing or just motion commands?
Go ahead, Jason.
No, that wouldn't do anything.
Yeah, it's just analyzing the pixels that it sees. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine is right back from Panama with how do you use Stream Deck over the network to control another computer?
I don't know if we have anybody doing that right now. I know that people are doing it. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I do. Please jump into after hours and yes, there are several of us. That's a follow up of the, I said put it on a its own device. Mm-hmm. Mindful of the time. There's no way I'm going to be able to even give you a soundbite on this.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, we talk about crisis management. What do you do for crisis prevention? I know Alex's PACE strategy, but would running a tabletop exercise with your crew for the most common failure scenarios, equipment failure, communication failure, and so forth, be useful?
We often do a lot of those. We don't really do tabletops. We literally do them before rehearsal. So we'll pull plugs out to make sure that the UPS is. I mean, a lot of times once we get everything set up, someone pulls the plug out and you hear everything beeping. It's to make sure that nothing turns off. like everything's beeping for a second, and we look for the screens and look for all the little lights and make sure that nothing got around it, because when you get set up, it can be you can get set up that way. We do things like unplug for instance, testing backup encodes with our elementals or whatever. We'll oftentimes pull the cable out. We don't just turn one side off or another. We pull the cable out because it does a better job at simulating a loss of connection. Otherwise, the elementals can do closed states if you stop one and start the other, or so on and so forth. So by arresting it, we find that that's a better test. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I mean, I've done exactly what you said, even in large-scale computer rooms, walk up behind the core routers and, let me see what happens when I pull this cable and see if everything falls over the correct way. But to Douglas's question, tabletop exercises have their place trying to figure out what potential failure scenarios you want to test.
Yeah, and the thing you have to always look at is you want to make it as redundant as you can, but there's a place where you can make it so redundant that it's actually more complex and has a higher chance of failure because you've added too many things into it.
I had a guy who was the program manager for the development for the onboard systems for the space shuttle. And he says, that was one of the first 2 SEI level 5 projects ever done. And the costs went up asymptotic as they went to higher and higher levels redundancy.
Yeah. Next question.
7th Scroll in Brooklyn, New York says, morning, guys. How much does it cost per hour to stream in 1080p versus 720p using an Amazon Web Services Elemental?
I actually don't know what the difference is between 1080p and 720p. When managed correctly, which I'm not always doing well, it's about $4 or $5 for this show. So for 2 hours. So it's not particularly expensive. It's me forgetting to turn it off that makes it expensive, and streaming out to a whole bunch of things at one time. So if I'm streaming to a bunch of things, or we're doing tests and I leave it open for those tests, it becomes more expensive. But I've been kind of managing this tightly. And there is some maintenance if you leave the links connected. That's like $1 or $2 a day or something like that. That's there. And then there is, I think it's like $1.50 a day that it costs to just leave them on, and then or something in that range. And then I think it's about, for 1080p, I think it's about $1.60 an hour. I think is basically what it costs us to do it. I when I'm managing it, I've been managing it much more tightly recently because my bill kept on getting big. And so I think that I'm going to be able to keep it, in the $175 range per month to do what we're doing here. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how do you balance building a supportive climate within your organization with guarding against one particular member negatively affecting the mood of the rest of the group?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Okay, this is a long question. Here's a short answer. You learn to listen as a first-line manager. You learn to have a coherent plan or process to get through things. And you beware of the brilliant jerk because, while they are brilliant to you, they may just be a jerk to everybody else.
Next question.
Next question comes from Mickey Ronas in Alexandria, Virginia, and he says, or she says, I don't know. Does anyone know of a good remote caller platform that will enable SDI outputs? We're looking for 8 remote callers, and we cannot use Zoom.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, you can do this. If by a remote calling system, I assume what you mean is something along the lines of, a mix minus. The easiest possible way to do this is with an X32 in Dante. Yes, there are switchers, the higher end SDI switchers with Blackmagic will do an automatic mix minus with a loop through. But yeah, your options are SDI in and out, using your own encoder, decoder, and X32.
The other ones that you might want to look at are neural net. It starts with a G. Neural net is one that we've tested a little bit, and we haven't. We're more Zoom based, so we've been stuck with what we have here, and I haven't used it recently. The other one that I've used pretty extensively before Zoom was Skype TX. So the Skype TX boxes are 4 channels per box. They are pretty good. Do not depend on the Dante to work. In my experience, it will slowly slide out of sync. But if you're using embedded audio in the SDI signals, you should find that's another solution that works pretty well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. The article talks about office celebrations as an informal interaction that remote workers miss out on. Couldn't many of those celebratory events be made virtual, see the concert tests we've done, and after hours in general, without much loss?
I know more than one person that's lost their job based on those celebrations. So I would say that they're as much a liability as anything else. Next question.
Dennis Wotek, it looks like, in New Kensington, says recommendations for video screen capture on a Mac other than the built-in capture.
Go ahead, John.
Look no further than ScreenFlow. I just wish the people at ScreenFlow would help the guys at Wirecast make their product more stable.
Yeah, ScreenFlow is great. On a Mac, I think that's probably your best capture option as well, or an outboard. I use Dex because it's just it puts it in the format that I expect. All right, I let it run over a little bit in case you're wondering, as a producer, when we run it over and when we don't. What's the decision process there? And it has to do with the fact that if we have an external guest, we will always end on time. You can guarantee that we will always end on time. And that, when I say external guest, any guest, even internal, like if we have somebody who's coming and it's not a general discussion, we will always end on time. And in fact, we're probably going to have to get better about ending on time all the time. But in this case, we didn't have a ton of questions. I don't know how long this subject will last based on just how many people will ask. If I don't see a lot of questions in the next hour, I go, well, we'll see how this goes. So I'm usually less worried about starting a little late. So some people ask me, like, why did we do that this day? And then you cut off a whole bunch of questions to start on time on the other day. So I felt like this was a good opportunity to explain. So anyway, we are looking at we're looking at potentially covering CGraph. We have to have a little bit more critical mass there if we're going to do that. But I think that in general, we've had time to really think about. We've decided that the Oshkosh, we just did not have critical mass and did not have any way to get a hotel room within an hour and a half of the place in the time frame. So it's something that's going to have to get pushed off. CGraph, we have to see where we're at and make sure that we have enough people to make that work. So if you're interested, contact me or some of the other folks there. Definitely still planning on IBC and NAB. So we're so really what we want to do is kind of talk through. And if you're really interested in CGraph, by the way, and you're ready to go to Vancouver, let us know, and we'll take that into account. We just need, I think, about 3 or 4 people is really what we have to know are absolutely going to be able to be there. I don't think we need more than that. We're going to go much lighter on CGraph than we have in the past. So it's just a single crew. We are trying to get a backpack, but we want to be ready for whatever makes sense. IBC, we have one LU800 that Richard Lavery is going to make available, and then it's just a matter of figuring out if there's going to be another one. Those are the kind of things that we're working on there. And then NAB, I expect to be able to have at least one live view. So we expect to. That's kind of where we're going with that. So I guess the big question for a lot of the producers and also for the panelists is what kind of, now that we've thought about it a little bit, some of us have gone back and looked at the content that we've shot, and trying to think about what kind of coverage would we like to see based on what we've seen in the past. And we'll keep on coming back to this about once a month just to kind of think about it as we get closer. I think it's worth discussing. So I think that, go ahead, Sky.
I'm sorry, I was waiting.
I can finish. I looked through a lot of it. I think that I think we're doing some of the better coverage that I've seen, because basically again, when you look at NAM and Cinegear, NAM had a bunch of other coverage. Not any of it that I found was live. I think we were the only ones potentially doing it live from NAM that I saw. And even then, a lot of the coverage that I saw, there was a lot of content and not a lot of teeth. Like it didn't get to the content. Yeah. I think our live stuff did a better job at getting to actual content and actual data than most of the other coverage that I saw in NAM or Cinegear. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to continue to intensify that. I really want us to get to as much protein as possible. As far as like when you're watching, you really feel like you're getting a lot of content, and even if it's live. I looked at ours, and I think that number one is I think Guy did a great job hosting. I think that was a lot of great coverage, and I also I think that all the hosting that was done that for both of those I thought were excellent as far as bringing those in. But I think that we do want to figure out how to get to one place to another faster. Like that, I think that's the thing that I was kind of left with, is wanting to make the content denser. And I think that I think that it was really cool that we had multiple cameras. I think the tank approach works well. I don't think I would make the tank the only thing I used. So if I don't have the ability to do 2 crews, watching it again, I probably would do something that's much more that would be lighter, whatever that is, so that we can move faster, through those things. Because I think that the biggest thing that I was left with, and I think we talked about this before, was that I was just left with, we didn't really get a feel for like all the things that were there. We kind of, and for long things, I think that, we have a second hour that we can put people in, so I feel like, having those, I do think that some of them were great, but I think that, shorter things that get to the point a little bit faster, I think would be useful. I did like some of the ones that we explored, and some of the ones I didn't expect to like, there. I did think that the grip one was really fun outside. I thought that was it Film Tools or Miller?
MSC, so that's Marshall or MSC.
Matthews Studio Equipment.
Matthews Studio.
Matthews, sorry.
Yeah, Matthews.
Yeah. So I thought that was fun. And I think more of those where and again, I think I felt like, now I admit that I'm coming a little bit from my past, which is that we always had handheld cameras. And so for us, being able to zoom in on something, coming on something to look at it and then pull back and then go in and then pull back was something that I missed, like I really felt like I wanted to see more of that. And maybe that means that we have two people that are operating as camera operators, taking turns, that kind of thing to do that. But I think that was something that I wished I had seen more of, was just getting up close-ups when we're talking. I think that was something, again, the methodology that we had, I think worked in a lot of ways, and it was able to we got some great multicam and so on and so forth. But I think that in some ways it made that kind of approach a little bit harder. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I'm just pondering this question of, again, what is the content? Is it in the moment, immediate? Is that the exciting thing that we offer? Or is it evergreen, because this is going to be information that could be used again and again and again as a repository or a curated experience? And I think a lot of the decisions were made by the boots on the ground that we had available to us. Could we have covered a whole bunch of different booths? Sure, if we'd had another dozen people and another dozen sets of equipment. So again, the only thing I'm going to counter with that is that I've done it with two people, so many times. So it's live, right. It was it comfortable? No. And what did we have little glitches? Yes. But once we got to four people, we were rocking and rolling, and so it is. And how many iterations did it take for you to get to that efficiency? How many times? Two times? Okay. So the second time you did it better, because
first time was a little bit wandering. Second time it was like,
the
first time it was mostly learning that center of Central Hall was a nightmare. Because I started there. And so we lost like an hour trying to figure out why we weren't getting, as soon as we got out of Central Hall, we were rocking, and so. And
I'm looking at SIGGRAPH and I'm thinking of Guy Cochran's been,
now when I say,
go ahead.
Yeah. When I say iterations, 2 live, but I had done records on probably 15 by the time I had gotten there. So I had,
you got some muscle memory that
I had
crew,
and again,
is still learning.
The things that I did is early on, I stopped interviewing people on I almost always, not always, if someone was really truly an expert, I'd still interview them at the booth. I think that when we picked up Deity Mics, I thought that was a great interview. That's someone that we want to just ask the questions of, because we had access to somebody who can actually answer the questions. But the vast majority of them, I didn't want to interview anybody, because they just talk too slow. They went around the house like 3 times to get in the front door, and so I just wanted to, I would absorb the information that they had and spit it back out again, and then go to the next thing. And then sometimes I take a rest by going to somebody that could answer the questions, but I think that, and I know I'm bringing a little bit of my past to that. So I think that one of the things that I thought that we're looking at for SIGGRAPH, if we get critical mass is hopefully we'll be able to persuade Guy to go up. It's not too far from Seattle.
Well, I was thinking I-5 right there is right next to your house there. Alex, you could just head up north and we'll buy your beer and good coffee up here. Good coffee.
Travel. So what was I going to say? The funny thing, by the way, is I have realized that the main reason I don't like to travel is actually this show. It's because the amount of logistics for me to be on every morning is it's incredibly stressful for me to be away, because then I have to take a mobile kit and I have to figure out if the internet's going to work, and I have to figure out it's literally, this show makes me extremely resistant to showing up somewhere else. I just feel like, I don't want to do. It's a little bit of a low level nightmare every time I'm not at the house when we start the show. So just so you know, it's not as much that I'm resistant to travel. It's that I'm resistant to running the show from a remote location.
Good beer. Just say it.
I'm spending a week in Pittsburgh in a couple weeks, and I'm organizing an office in my friend's ISP to make sure that I just have somewhere to go in the morning. So I was like, I gotta start now to prep that. So anyway, so I think that the other thing that Nick Justin's willing to walk around with us, and I'm looking for a couple other folks. As soon as we're sure that we have critical mass to go up, what I'd love to do is have Guy going around, in a perfect world, having Guy going around with Nick, and but find there's a couple other folks that I know that are. SIGGRAPH was the first event that I went to, over 25 years ago. And so I have a lot of friends that have been there, have gone a lot of times. And so being able to go around with experts and have them just show us what they think as some segment of it, I think would be a lot of fun. And I think we could do the same thing. I looked at we've talked about it in the past. There's a couple of us that when we walk around NAB and IBC and so on and so forth. And, what a lot of people want is just to walk around with us, and in some cases, less of a show and more of a behind the scenes of just 2 or 3 people that go to the show all the time, follow them around and just watch them talk to people, for not the whole show, but something like that. It's always something. Guy, what's your thought based on someone was on the ground?
I haven't been able to go to SIGGRAPH yet, so it's kind of an interesting show to me, because the great thing about an NAB and a Cinegear is that I've gone for years. I know a lot of people, I know the products. So SIGGRAPH's kind of an anomaly. I mean, I'm into graphics, but not hardcore like Nick is. I'm not an Unreal expert. I'd love to dive into it more, but I want to be able to, if I'm the host, I want to be able to ask intelligent questions. So I think I need to get up to speed quick on the show and watch some previous interviews that other people have done that are successful.
And that's exactly why I'd love to pair you up with some folks that have gone to SIGGRAPH many years and know the industry. And so it takes, the idea would be to taking a little bit of pressure off of you to try to come to speed. It's a lot to come to speed on. It's an entirely different, not entirely different, but a lot different than what's there. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I used to do CES every year, and I discovered that there were 2 or 3 different modes I would be in, depending what I was trying to get out of it. Mode 1 was I wanted to walk around the floor to try and get the themes and the ideas and what was new and what was the focus of the year, which was typically different from what CES told you it was. And, you saw the first time that drones really became a big thing. You look for, and that can only be done by wandering around the floor. So I think there's a mode, and I think it was done really well by Guy as he walked around the floor. That's how you get that theme. There's then the second step, which for me is there are people who there were booths that I want to go in and ask the 2 minutes worth of question, because I really don't want to get deeply into a conversation, but I just want to know what it is. And then third is there are some deep dives. And I think you can do the first 2 the way that, Guy did it with some drop-ins, even some pre-recorded segments. But I think the third one is better done as a second hour. That's when you really want to have a more detailed conversation. I think we have to work out what the different modes are, and then work out how to best solve for them.
I mean, part of the problem that we have with the inviting second hours, because I was thinking about that, is that most of the manufacturers have such bad video and audio in their own offices that you can't depend on them for the second hour, because they're under resourced once they go home. So they spend all this money on their booth, and then they have no way to get on Zoom and actually look and sound normal. So that's one of the big challenges that we have with a lot of manufacturers, is they're just under resourced, and which is, to me, feels crazy. I do think that if we had 2 teams for any of these, having one wandering around, almost not even, I don't know, in some cases, not even asking questions, not even interacting with the booth, is just to allow one team to get from one place to another. Another team we're just cutting over to another team. And I think that can be, I think we have to test a lot of these things, but I think some of it can be on a phone. One of the things that I think is going to be interesting in Vancouver is because SIGGRAPH is so much smaller. And I think we probably could have gotten away with this at Cinegear as well. I bet you cell coverage is going to work. I think that cell coverage is actually going to be viable without bonding. We'll just be able to use a phone, to do that. I started to experiment with that last weekend at the farmers market. I think a couple people saw me in after hours turn on my phone to test bandwidth, from a location. The problem is we can't depend on it. We don't know until we get there as to what we're doing. Yeah,
well, and Rogers is happy to take your money, but I know that I don't remember what my contract is now with Canada. So that's where we're no longer inside the lower 48.
We can figure that out.
Sure.
So the that's not a super expensive problem, for a day. I mean, I've done it all over the world, so I'm not super worried about that process. But I've done it in Canada. so anyway, Canada is a little easier than some of the other countries that we've extended it for. And you just need an international plan.
I'm just so used to doing it, because I'm in the lower 48 and not even thinking about, excess charges. But yes, you might make many phone call in Canada. Like but it is an expense that will be something we wouldn't have to do in the lower 48.
Yep. Anyway, so I think that I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I felt like the biggest thing that I keep on going back to as I kind of look over them was really feeling like getting the breadth of what's there. The advantage that we have there is to explore. I did like the sprigs, which I'm very excited about, the little sprig connectors. Finding those, that might be, that's what when I was thinking, when Nigel was talking, one of the things I was thinking about there was that a lot of what I do when I go to NAB and CES is look for things that are under the radar, things that are not going to be, that I'm not going to easily see advertisements for, or I'm not going to see press releases for. A lot of times, one of the things that I do pretty often is I do actually get the NAB paper. Do you guys get when you guys go to NAB, there's a newspaper that you can get?
I do.
And I pick it up, and the first thing I do when I get in, I don't know. Somehow you have to pay or something. I don't know how people get it delivered to their hotel room. I don't know how that occurs.
That exists?
Yeah, no, you see it. It's outside of people's hotel rooms. I think it's because they bought the hotel room through NAB or whatever, so they know that
part of a package.
Yeah. So since I don't do that, I don't get one. So I go, you can always get one walking in, and I grab it. I grab a cup of coffee and I sit down and I circle a bunch of stuff. I have a big Sharpie and I circle things on it of these are things that, because they're like every product that's getting released and anything new. And I circle, I need to go to this, and I circle where the booth is. And then I start making a plan on where those booths are to make sure that I see the things that are in it. That paper turns out to be super valuable to me, to find things, because otherwise I'll step over them. And then again, I try to give myself enough time just to kind of almost aimlessly wander and allow my eye to just be caught by things that I find interesting. And I think that's the thing that's hard to do with the teams right now is that we just need to find a way that we can roam a little bit and just kind of fall into things. We did a little bit of that, and I thought that was great. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, as I'm looking at the website here, and again, like Guy, my familiarity is 20 years going to NAB, and I've got friends there, and I get in free for the exhibitions, but I've hardly ever paid for any of these breakout sessions or the conferences or even some of the post show that happens. And so that's where I'm looking at this event. Are we thinking we're going into just the exhibition hall, and that's what we're capturing is the technology?
Yeah,
okay.
That's all we're doing.
Well, that's narrowing.
Yeah, it's I don't. The sessions are heady. Like I don't know. Like I've sat in the back of a bunch of NAB sessions, mostly because I get typically at NAB, I have a press pass, an exhibitor pass, and a speaker pass. So I just flip whichever one gives me what I need to do at the moment to get somewhere. I usually just go to where, I just flip which one I'm using. And as a result, I sit in the back of a bunch of NAB ones. I don't know how much I've ever absorbed from the NAB ones, from any of the sessions that I've sat in. And I teach some of them. And then I will say the SIGGRAPH ones, I just feel dumb when I sit in the back of them. Like the NAB ones, I don't feel like I'm getting anything new. And the SIGGRAPH ones I feel like I'm so underwater that I don't understand. It's a lot of math, and I understand math, but not math like that math. Like that math is like math, and so occasionally I'll sit in the ones that are kind of cool to sit in. The ones we would want to cover the most would typically be the breakdowns. They break down visual effect shots for movies, and those are the ones we can't broadcast. So that's the challenge there. Again, as we go into, because we're looking at like kind of all the coverage, as we look at IBC will be the most challenging one to cover because it is the size of NAB in, as I've said before, the most confusing building ever built. At least how they use it. I don't know if it's just how they're using it, or whether the RAI is as complicated as it feels when I'm there. But the RAI is just I just never know where I'm at. Like, I never know how to get back to a booth that, I mean, I do by the end. By the end, I kind of go, oh, I know where aperture is, or I know where this is, and I know which hall connects to the other one. But it takes me a long time, more than any other place I've ever been for a conference. The RAI, I just find to be kind of this intelligence test that I'm constantly failing. Go ahead, Jason.
For those of us who have been to a lot of shows, as with Vegas, like, you do get better at it. Of course you do. And getting back to the idea of the sprigs, the spontaneous happy accidents, of course, a larger show would require a larger team. And to that end, what I would picture would be somebody either, on comms or radio, or just some way to talk back to production and essentially go ahead of the tank. And, just kind of look and say, like, maybe this, maybe that, the equivalent of your circling in a book, things.
But I think that the other thing that we have to do is we have to decide with a limited number of people, what's the first thing we do? What's the second thing we do? What's the third thing we do? From what if I only have one team, I would have a team that's kind of roaming handheld that does quick interviews or does quick hits on things. The second team I would probably have is the roaming one that had a cell phone or something smaller or another live view if we could get it given to us. And then the third team would be the tank. Like, I don't think I'd make the tank the first thing, just because I think it's a heavier approach to it. And I don't think that, again, I think that we have to figure out a way to have people trade off if we're doing handheld. I mean, we did handheld for 6 hours, I think, is the longest stint that we did without any real break was 6 hours.
And getting the tank across the border is going to be a significant issue, and it's also NOAA's equipment.
Oh, I don't think. Well, so SIGGRAPH is not going to. Okay, we have to back up a little bit. SIGGRAPH is not going to be a tank, and I don't. And we'll have to ask Richard what he's planning for IBC. But SIGGRAPH is not going to be anything on the ground. It's going to be at most a handheld in a backpack, kind of thing, or monopod in a backpack, or the little thing that hangs over top of you in the backpack. But I think that's where we want to, go with that. I don't think that, and it's mostly because it's just a smaller show too. I mean, I don't think we want to make it quite for our team. I think we want to make it light and
again,
fast.
you've crossed borders before, carnets and things. We also
have people in Vancouver too.
A couple, yeah.
So we need one camera, so we'll be okay. And bringing in cameras, small cameras are not hard into Canada. It's bringing big cameras. I brought the 950 into Canada, and it was complicated. So anyway, and a red into there, and both of those were complicated. So I wouldn't recommend that. But I think that otherwise, I think we can probably find our way in. I'm not too worried about those logistics. I'm mostly worried about creatively what we, what we want to cover and how we want to cover it. I think we just want to stick with that. Don't worry about the logistics of getting things in and out of countries. That's something I'm really good at.
Well, and I don't want to get, I mean, forget about what I said about the tank. I mean, my overall idea was, one person in advance who, is somewhat familiar with the show and, and the way that it lays out to go through quickly and say, possible, but not on our list. And then a show caller.
I think that one thing that could be interesting also is having our larger group pay more attention to, like, as we go into SIGGRAPH or NAB or IBC, having us do research as a group. Like, hey, we're really interested in these booths. Let's make sure we cover those and try to not have it just be the team on the ground that's doing the research, but really having a larger group of folks that are, and I know we voted on some of those things ahead of time, but I think we could probably do more as far as giving them some guidance around that. I think we can get better at that, in my opinion. Well, let's go to the next question.
Roscoe Jones in Brea, California, up with this first one. How does a single company event like WWDC affect our coverage versus a multi-company event or trade show? Panel size versus expertise, active versus passive coverage, something like that.
I'll go, Jason.
I'll take a start at this because WWDC was mentioned. I don't think it will ever be 100% live ever again. I really don't think that it will be. I think they are so much better when, the big thing is the keynote and, whatever awards, and then it actually really gets into the heady things. And, the people that understand it really are those who should be covering it best. As far as from which company, from multiple companies or from one company, that particular distinction I don't think would matter.
I mean, I think that we want things that have expos in them, like in general. We covered WWDC because we have for a long time, or we have a couple times, and then a huge part of a huge percentage of office hours folks are Mac users. It's unlike other things. It's not 50-50. It's like 80%. So as a result, WWDC sits a little higher as far as those are a lot of things, and a lot of what Apple's doing affects a lot of us directly. So new releases, new changes in technology, new hardware definitely affects folks. So we are definitely acknowledging the existing user base when we cover WWDC the way we do. But I would love to cover Google I/O the same way, F8, Build, all of those AWS, some of the Amazon stuff. I mean, all those things are stuff that I'm willing to cover. It's just a matter of, I think that we're not going to do that this year. I think this year, we're looking at IBC and NAB and SIGGRAPH, and then potentially Zoomtopia, just because Zoom is obviously a big thing for us as well. And they have an expo that we can wander around and see new things that people are building for that. So I think that that's the only other one this year that I'm really tracking, at the moment, unless people can self-build a system for it. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Very much what you're saying. And also Apple is weird in that it's very much a closely held information company, and they only let out, they attempt to exercise substantial control over their messaging at all times. And WWDC is an unusual event for them because it is public facing and it's there to draw the developer community together. And I think to burnish Apple's reputation as being a software aware company, which is unlike a lot of the other ones who do software but don't do it as their primary thing. So I just don't think anything is going to ever be quite like WWDC. And I've heard Alex talk about, and I agree with him, that when it just becomes promotion, when you're just getting booth people there to promote, here's what we're telling you, and that's all we want you to know, that really takes a lot of the life out of live coverage, as opposed to here's another technologist talking to a technology company, investigating what it really means for our audience. That is a much more compelling story rather than just a press kit.
And again, I think that where Apple's, specifically with Apple, where Apple's going and where these other companies are going has a huge impact on our business. And that's why I think that we want to, again, I would like to expand to other ones. We just want to not do more than we can do. We just want to do enough that this year that we can iterate and figure out what the best solutions are. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I think we also have to remember we have multiple different audiences. We have informed audiences and we have new audiences and people who don't necessarily know these events. And we have to think about our coverage through that lens as well and try and get, if you go too deep, too fast, then people who don't understand the content will just drift away. And I think we have to make sure we balance what we provide to our audience.
Good, Sky.
Well, and that's the question I've been having with some of these other previous events of the content that's being created, the artistry that is, again, creative, that origin of story, that the inspiration of something. And I'm looking at the lectures. They've got some very fascinating lectures, but again, we seem to go in and really focus in on the hardware or the software.
Yeah,
so,
and I admit I just hate lectures. So I sure. That's a little bit of this is driven from the fact that I get really bored quickly. And so I just spend so little time in listening to lectures because a lot of times they're recorded and available somewhere else. And so it's not like I'm not that interested in, I'm more interested in things that we can, using the expo to have a conversation about that technology is super interesting to me. So getting those experts that might be speaking somewhere, like Nick Justishin, he comes in to talk about stuff, and he's usually the speaker.
Well, one of the speakers this year is Dr. Ed Catmull, co-founder of Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep. But I'd rather find a way to get Mr. Catmull on our show for a Q&A than cover an event of him speaking. And I don't think they would let us, even if we wanted to, broadcast that out. Go ahead, Jason.
This keeps coming back in my head to, when the Gestalt comes up with the best question, getting it on, to the person who needs to answer it as quickly as possible. And then when possible, getting the expert to be, back and forth with the right expert at the show. Whether it's multi-company or single company, none of that really matters. It's, when the collective is better, great. When the single person, like, when Nick Jeshishin can do Nick Jeshishin's things and ask Nick Jeshishin questions, at a show.
And we do want to be able to make sure that we can get asked. I mean, I think that is one of the real power that we have is asking, asking those questions, in real time, that people are asking. I don't think that I definitely, we talked about this before, but I don't think that the relaying the question in an audio way made sense. I think we need to find a way that we can put a speaker there or something that if someone's going to interact from the panel with someone there, it really has to be directly, like having a conversation, which I think is doable. I mean, it's something that we can experiment with. And again, I think that we may end up using, I know this will sound crazy, but I may end up using some of these farmers market things as a test case for fast and light, where I'm talking to some folks that are, I don't know if I can get their schedule to work out, but right now I'm talking to some folks that are buyers, for produce, trying to get them to come on. So they're on the show with us, and then we're interacting with them live back and forth and talking about stuff where they can show us stuff. And I'm kind of working through that process at the moment. But I do want to find something that is light and easy that we can practice between now and these bigger events, so that we're getting used to the interaction informally and after hours, rather than trying to figure it all out on one big show and having such. Right now, I do feel like our lift is really heavy for each show, and we're not able to iterate fast enough. And so I'm trying to find smaller shows that we can iterate. Something I'm trying to figure out right now. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, if we could find sufficient qualified on-the-ground crew, what would you think of covering foreign language events with real-time interpretation?
Someday, yes. But probably not anytime soon. So it's captions and interpretation very quickly become 60 to 80% of your show when you add them. So you have to be ready to do them, and we will have to get really good at what we're doing right now before I would add that level of complexity. It's just been it's been something that I specialize in, so I know exactly what it takes to do both audio dubbing or some kind of second channel, as well as captioning, and it's something that I without heavy resources I won't try to do. And almost every conference that I've been to all over the world is held in English because it's the language that most of the participants can speak. Next question.
Next question, Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. What gear, as in a backpack kit, does each panelist feel they could use to cover an event? Assumption by Stream Voodoo works well. Do we need a standardized kit or many different ideas for a lightweight kit?
I mean, the two that I've used in the past is a phone and a live view. And so those are a camera with a live view is a pretty, the live view goes on as a backpack. The camera can sit on a monopod, and that has been, I haven't tested. I've watched other people covering the footage with that little thing that goes over your back and then comes down over the top. I haven't seen anybody use it for live coverage, but I'm sure you could. But those are the things that are from a backpack perspective that I've seen work in the past. No one else is raising their hand. So
that's often branded as an easy rig. That's one of the company that makes it, right, that has that suspension arm.
Has anyone used those? Has anyone used those?
Yeah, I've hired people that have used them on sets, and it works pretty well. There is still there's a load depending on the weight of the camera. It's usually for larger cameras, and really the Betacam size things is what I've seen it mostly used for. Never used one personally.
There you go, Jason.
Well, just as a quick aside, is this completely separate from the vest that I'm accustomed to seeing on set for a Steadicam? Like, you're talking about a backpack that does the suspension.
Similar,
it's
but
not
different.
a vest.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a couple of things. One is a Steadicam. You really have to know what you're doing. The biggest thing you have to be careful of with a Steadicam is the arm swinging out. And in a live coverage, you can get, well, what happens is that it's a leverage problem. So you put a relatively heavy camera on I almost, like literally almost ruptured my back with this problem. We had a pretty original red camera, and the arm swung out, and suddenly it's a lever that's suddenly putting an enormous amount of pressure on your back. And so it's super important to not let that arm swing out. You'll suddenly feel your whole back, your lower lumbar will just suddenly just feel like it's just about to be ripped in half. So you have to be super careful of that. And so Steadicams are, my brother's a Steadicam operator, and so they're powerful tools, but it's not something you want anybody who doesn't have a lot of experience and training. How my brother got into Steadicam was that we literally rented a Steadicam and put it in. And that's how I almost lost my back. And so because we just didn't know what we were doing, we took like a 1-day course and started shooting stuff for a commercial, and we got some good shots. I mean, it was okay. My brother thought it was amazingly fun, and next thing you know, he's got a big rig, very complicated area Trinity. And anyway, so but I think that the easy rig is probably a better solution, or a monopod to kind of move around in. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Sky Gleason in Seattle. What day would be best?
It's kind of in the middle of the week.
What I would say is the last expo day is usually the best day to shoot a live thing. Now we can go second to the last day. I don't know how many days. Is it 3 days or 4 days? I can't remember.
It's 3 days in the middle of the week.
Yeah. So the main thing is that the last day is good because it's empty, and there's just a lot. Usually it's relatively empty, and there's not a lot of people in the way. The first day is the worst day, in my opinion, to do any live, because it's usually the busiest day of the system, and so that is usually the day.
Specifically talking about SIGGRAPH here. I'm
talking about a generalized solution for all of these.
Sorry, there you go.
So the first day is the worst day because it's usually the one that's the busiest. It's where a lot of people want to do coverage because they want to be the first one out with the news and everything else. I'm not as worried about that. The second day is, if there's 4 days, I'll go the third day. If there's 3 days, I'll think of it as the second or third day. The last day, the real problem you have is they might be ending early, which may not affect us. And then, you just have to get through things, because the last hour people are like breaking things down, trying to get things done. So you may lose some stuff. It also is harder if you're going to interview people, if you're going to interview people, because by the third day, they're usually a little scratchy. By the fourth day, a lot of them can barely talk. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind. The first day, what I love to do on the first day is to research, so I go around. This is where I would capture little segments that are interesting. So my recommendation would be to go to booth with whoever's there, not trying to take a rig, taking a phone, getting a good microphone system, whether it's Saramonic or someone else or whatever it is, that you could, like, this is what I see. I know people don't believe me, but the staff at the booth slows you down. And so like you just, you ask them questions, and then you just say, look at this, this is this, and this is this, this is this, this is how this works, this is what it looks like. And you kind of just pan around. I love that content because it just tells me what I need to know really quickly. And so I would highly recommend that. Anything that requires editing slows us down. And I think we're seeing that in some of the coverage that we have. That's why, I'll keep on coming back to, it's all in the camera. Like it's an in-camera shoot. What I do with those is I am pretty specific. I start on the sign that's in the booth. So you'll see a lot of times, and I just kind of grew to this thing where I start and I say, I'm here at aperture, and I swing down, and this is and you'll see me practice it a bunch of times, like, and I'll come down to this, and then I'll move over. And a lot of times I'll kind of play with it before I do it, and I'll think through it. I'll kind of talk to myself a little bit, and then I go up and I come down and I talk about what I want to talk about. I zoom into the thing that I want to pull back out. I don't do any zooming. I mean, just move the camera around and show you what I want, and so on and so forth. And then I close it. And if I don't think that was a good take, I just do it again, because it's way faster for me to do it again than try to edit anything into it. And so again, this comes from like just to try mass production. If you have one or two people doing this, you can cover. I mean, I can do 20 segments a day that way, and just head and tail them, and that's it, and you put them in, and then those are great little things we can throw in for all the things that we didn't cover. My recommendation is we really think hard about that, is having a person or two that is going to go around handheld capturing the things that they're interested in, and that we see happening. And that might be also walking around with a handful of people that might not be available for the live, but they'll show you things that they're interested in and that type of thing. But try to get as much all in one shot as possible. Here's what it leaves you with. If you have a large editing staff, then they can add lower thirds, they can add opens and closes, they can add, other like data, like this is how much it costs, and this is what it looks like, this is where it is, and this is that kind of QR codes to the website, all those things. But you want to make it that if you don't have people or they get backed up, you still have content. And the problem that we get into when we try to shoot for edits is that if you don't have resources or the resources get backed up, you don't have any content, And so I do think we want to keep on looking at how do we keep on increasing information density. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. What do you think of partnering with a mobile communications company to co-promote said coverage and possibly for assistance with costs? Yeah, we're talking to some folks. So stay tuned. So as far as, if you're talking about live views and so on and so forth, there's a couple different companies that do that kind of thing. So we're talking to a couple of them to see who can provide us what we need for that. Not so much covering the costs, but covering, making sure we don't have to pay for that gear. Next question. Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. I've been building a rolling rig and the vest's cool, but the small rig isn't a monopod the easiest setup?
Yeah. So I do think that the monopod is the easiest setup for that, and that's what we've used in the past, is just set down a monopod. And
the monopods with the lean, right? You kick it down and you got the three little, yeah.
Next question.
Next question
Bill,
comes
from Bill.
I was just going to note, a monopod's been very successful to me, predominantly with phone cameras, because they're so light. You can literally move them all day long and not wear out. You put something bigger, like you put a Blackmagic 60 on the top of a monopod, you're going to get tired over the course of 4 or 5 hours of schlepping that around.
It's funny. I don't think of the Blackmagic 6K as the Pocket 6K as a very big camera.
It's not until you get it rigged up and you carry it all day.
We carried. What we did mostly was EX3, which is a fair bit bigger than that. I don't know if the weight's much different, but it was a fair bit bigger than the little 6K.
I use a quick strap is kind of an amazing thing. It looks like a detective's sidearm thing, but it allows you to just pull up whatever you need and get it, and then just kind of almost let go.
Right, absolutely. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Break, California. How might weather play a role? I've had remotes on the snow here that on office hours that were great. We've had remotes
in the snow. I'm hoping that weather doesn't play too much of a role in what we're covering or how we're covering it. I think that it's. I think the one place it does make a difference is it would be nice to, if there's weather, it's fun to shoot some of it as like in betweens, So I did some stuff with we did a studio project in Davos, and a couple of them. And what's great about Davos is a lot of snow. So we shot a lot of exterior shots of snow and people walking through the snow and people going down the ski resort and people doing the things, and those are great as like little in betweens when you're trying to get to something else. So picturesque things. Again, I think I've mentioned this before. A lot of times I will run out when we're doing live streams and go grab a bunch of that stuff with a phone. Like I literally have a little Osmo, and I will run out there and just I have a hit list of the things that are kind of features of that city or features that I want to grab onto, and I just run around and grab all those things. Like in Vancouver, you'd want to go. I can't think of the island that's there. There's an island there with a whole bunch of shops and everything else. That
Granville. Yeah,
Granville. So you want to go to Granville Island. There's some cool little art shops there, and a really good restaurant. And then Stanley Park, and go around there and grab some stuff that's there. And then there's just some, what do they call it? I always want to call it the oil district. It's the is it the Lamplight district area? It's just like all these shops and stuff like that. And I can't think of the name of it right now. But so there's a bunch of cool little shops all through Vancouver that I would go and probably grab onto and just use those as glue, to make that work. The coolest thing to do if we can is if we were able to get an expo, I think we can get an expo pass, is time lapse of the expo getting set up. It's just the coolest thing. Every expo that I get to, trying to get a time lapse over a day or two, it's pretty cool. Anyway, next question.
Sky Gleason, Seattle, Washington. SIGGRAPH is 3 days in a single room. Can we take a survey to see what people want to learn about, or should we be surprised at what is found by the team?
I think we want to do a little bit of both. I mean, I think we definitely want to know what people want to see, hopefully ahead of time, and then try to be opportunistic. I will admit that SIGGRAPH is probably a little less. There's less of the. I haven't been there for a couple of years, so I could be wrong. But my experience of SIGGRAPH is there's less of the little companies that are doing something funky, and more of because the graphic stuff is just harder to do. It's more infrastructure, so there's less of the little 10-foot booths and more of the. But there's lots of. I mean, there's so much eye candy at SIGGRAPH just because so many it's graphics. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I mean, would it make sense to bring something to tap into systems? And do you think that they would allow that so we can pull like a clean feed of an HDMI feed? I mean, I just haven't been to that show. I mean, some people, depending on if you know them well enough, they'll be like, go ahead, plug your HDMI.
I think that would depend on how many. If we end up with one crew, I wouldn't recommend it. If we ended up with 3 crews, I would. Like it's one crew is like really set up for that. And that would be kind of the tank process of that it's set up to do the thing and make that work. Again, if I had smaller number of people, I probably wouldn't tie myself down to trying to get that to work.
I just think it's going to be rough if that's predominantly what the show is. If it's showing screens and I'm sitting there with an iPhone or somebody shooting and I'm hosting and it's like, and look at this thing and it's like this big and somebody's, shaking around.
I could be wrong, but I mean, in the past, it's usually been on big LED walls. Like it's not, they're not looking at a little monitor unless you're walking up to one of the demo artists. There's usually, they have to make sure that people can see it walking by. So usually you have a pretty good representation. I could, we may get surprised, but typically I think that you're going to find that it's mostly some pretty big screens that are available. But being ready for that is great. I just don't know how quickly and easily we'd be able to tie into those things. So I maybe once or twice for
I'm going to have 2 decimators in like a holsters, and I'm going to be like.
Exactly.
Guy, I feel a road trip coming on.
I think you need to build a case. I think we need to build a case for the decimator that has a battery pack in it. So there's just it's like a self-contained. Do you have that?
Actually, I have it right here. Yeah, this is HDMI and SDI and it would transmit. So actually I would just drop this right on their table next to their computer if it would, give us the right computer resolution. Right. But a lot of them will take 1080i or 1080p 30. So yeah, this combo. And this is just a battery, USB-C or MP Sony batteries. So those could work.
And what is that? Who makes
these?
That?
Are Vaxis, but I also have a couple different ones, Teradek bolts and whatnot.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's think about it. I can be persuaded. Next question.
I think it's our last one. Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Should we be aiming for 1080 or is 4K for these events even possible? Or is the bandwidth just going to be our bottleneck?
I go, Jason.
I'll answer the question that wasn't quite asked. For the single shot, show up in your production blacks, hide your press thing so the staff don't bother you, and, get that single shot that Alex is talking about. There's no reason for nearline that it shouldn't be 4K. And as far as the live on, the real time stuff, it's really easy to scale down. I don't know.
Good, Sky.
I just keep wanting to say, what is it that we're doing? And it just feels like news. And news at this point is immediate and wrestling an elephant through a stir straw is at this time we just don't have the horsepower, the manpower, and the wetware.
Well, everything in our system is set up for 4K HDR except for the transmission. So if we get a partnership with someone who has an LU 800, there's not really any reason why we can't. So it's just a matter of
the limit.
We can. The big thing is that. That's actually not as hard a lift as it sounds to get that transmission back, and no one's ever done it before. Which always
and if we're not editing and doing a lot of posing
Well,
and transmitting. That's the other. I'm just looking at the bottlenecks that we've had in the past, and it's been trying to shove elephants through surf straws.
There's definitely things that I see as painful, and one of them is editing on site for stuff, which I've done an incredible amount of. Like just like say me saying, hey, we should not try to edit these clips is not because I haven't done it or I don't get paid to do it. To build teams that do that. It's that I just know how much work it is, and I'm just like, that's not where I want to spend resources. And to be honest, I want to. If we have editing resources, we have a bunch of people that have already signed up that are interested in this stuff. If we have the editing resources, I would rather use them on adding cool graphics and adding heads and tails and doing things that are extras that make it zing. I'd rather use it that way than have them trying to cut something that we edited. Maybe at some point we grow into something else, but I think that we need to
Mike
keep
Sweeney's
our elbows
a
in.
hero. Mike, he edited a whole bunch, and then down in Australia as well.
Yeah. No, and I think that we want to. I just think that I'd rather use the resources in other places because I don't think that multicam cutting, and it depends. It depends on who's doing it. I can tell you that I think, especially, I think that my handheld stuff is as good as anything I was editing, together. That's why. That's when I switched over to it. I was like, and it's much more of a YouTube-y kind of thing, like YouTuber, the online stuff of moving the camera around and just kind of being there. I think it works well. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, if we had the budget, the way that I would do it is 2 Epiphan pearls. One is the encoder that can do 4K, and that would push down to your decoder over at 090, and that's almost real time, very low latency SRTH.265. The other thing is on the floor, if we can get a hardwire from a vendor, and I think Nick Justin, since he's an EDU, might have internet. So I would just put the decoder there and then throw a bolt, a big bolt, like a 10,000 that would just blanket the whole area. And then we could cruise around and do up to 4K if we wanted to, wireless transmission. And now we're hard lined in. And the only thing that's going to knock us out is, there's lots of other stuff that can knock us out.
Solar event. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, we're going to work pretty hard at trying to get something that lets us just transmit out, but we'll take a look at it. The hard part is that the bandwidth is so expensive. So we'll have to figure out what that booth is already using.
But that's the thing. Yeah. For an EDU, they should just give it to them. They should. Education.
They should. We'll find out. We'll find out what they, anyway, that, a lot of times you get these events in business. so it's, anyway, all right. Well, very good. Good conversation. So we'll keep kicking it around and we'll be a little closer to it soon. All right. Thank you so much to the producers for keeping those questions rolling in for 2 hours. And thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you, of course. And thanks to the folks behind the scenes putting this thing together every single day. And we'll see you now all in after hours.
I love throwing money at problems. Oh, boy.
Just almost had to sign my life away when I took a camera over once. So be careful crossing borders.
Blame Canada, but enjoy them anyway.
We've got no credit rules.